Hello, this is Lex, and welcome to the Nextep Remote Podcast, where I have the pleasure to interview some of the best remote work experts from all over the world. In each episode, we cover a topic, success story, or challenge to help you make remote work work. Enjoy! Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you all. This is the final episode in a mini-series focused on HR and people that we've done over the past few weeks. Initially, it focused on recruitment and employee branding. Last week, it was onboarding. This week, the topic is offboarding. And it's a tricky one because it's also very important considering what lies ahead for many organizations in the months to come. It's been partially inspired by Airbnb's handling of the layoffs that they will have to, or they're actually gone through 25% of layoffs of their workforce. And a conversation I had with Angelina Ebeling on last week's episode. And that's one of the reasons I've invited Angelina back to have a chat with me. And for those who haven't listened to last week's episode, Angelina is the founder and CEO of acework, and specializes in transition companies to flexible working and regularly consults teams on effective hiring remote talent. For the first time, we have a second guest on the show, and that is Ben Hanley, who is a multi-award winning digital leader who, after growing a fully remote digital marketing team within the hospitality industry for 5 years, has recently started 3&6, a hospitality digital marketing agency with transparency and honesty at the core. Angelina, welcome back. Ben, welcome to the show for the very first time. Great to have you both.
Yeah,
thanks for having us.
Yeah. And good luck with two guests.
Good luck with two guests. It will be fun.
Especially us.
Well, listen, as I say, it's a first time. I've got no idea how it's going to go. It can be amazing or it can be a car crash. My aim is for it to be amazing. So I'm sure we can manage. Ben, first question for you is, where are you in the world?
Where am I in the world? I am in Lancaster, which is the north of England, which is unseasonably sunny for this time of year. So if you can hear my fan whirring away in the background, I'll apologise now. But yeah, it's lovely up here, and I've been here for the last 7 or 8 years now. So yeah, quite enjoy this place, and it's so conveniently located to Manchester as well and the airports. So great place to be.
I'm in the UK as well, and absolutely, the stretch of weather we've had for the past 2.5 months has been just very much not the UK like. Anywho, Angelina, I'm assuming that with all the restrictions, you are still in the same place you were last time we spoke.
Yes, I am still in Berlin, even though since last time we spoke, in between I visited my parents. Actually, they live in Frankfurt, so we do get to travel in Germany. I think we're a little bit further ahead than you guys at the moment, but Berlin also unseasonably warm. You don't miss a vacation right now. It's just sunny enough here.
Well, you're lucky that you can travel. We can move around a lot more. We're recording this in the middle of June, so restrictions are being lifted more and more, and yeah, we're going back to some sort of element of normality. Anyway, offboarding. So I'd like to help frame our conversation today, and there are a lot of elements to offboarding. It's a very broad topic, and so are the reasons why somebody might leave an organization. It can be involuntary, it can be voluntary, it can be redundancy. Because of what I mentioned, that a lot of organizations, in my opinion, will be facing this problem in the months to come, I'd like us to focus on redundancy. That's the kind of aim, and talk about offboarding in general as much as possible at the start, and then move into kind of relating it to remote work. And so for anyone listening, it can be valuable for numerous reasons. I guess I'll start with sharing my belief. My belief is that leaving an organization should be as a positive experience as joining an organization. What are your thoughts on that?
Don't mind kicking this off. Couldn't agree with you anymore. And I feel like I've written that down somewhere myself. Leaving an organization should be as positive as joining it. And unfortunately, in my experience and for what I've seen, the people I've spoken to, it very rarely is, for a number of reasons. And it's such a missed opportunity. Companies focus on these bright-eyed and bushy-tailed people bounding through the door with enthusiasm, coming to bring their special brand to the workplace. and they get swag, they get cups and stickers and a little name tag and maybe something for your desk to sit at, and they get welcome onboarding meetings. And then when they decide to leave for whatever reason, voluntary or involuntary, a lot of it seems to be, it's all right, can you just leave your keys and your pass there and we'll pretend you never existed, as they are escorted off the premises. And it's an absolute waste of an opportunity that holds so much potential, not just for the company, but for the person. Companies, they spend too much, in my opinion, too much time on the onboarding and not on the offboarding. If you could sort of balance it out in the middle, so both of those get the same attention. What I think the problem is that companies see a poor onboarding procedure as too much of a risk, but don't recognize the risks of a poor offboarding procedure, which in my mind, exponentially worse. Somebody can do more damage to the company with a poor offboarding procedure than they possibly could with a poor onboarding.
Absolutely agree as well. Absolutely agree. We had a very long conversation about onboarding, and we talked about, the swag that should go into it, and like all the effort that should go into it for obvious reasons, which is like, you get someone new into your organization, you want them to be productive and do work that you're paying them for. But exactly what Ben said, that sort of detrimental element of or poorly offboarded employee is very invisible. So what we try and uncover a little bit, hopefully also today, is that there is a very clear business case for a good offboarding procedure, that you can maybe even like boil that down to a number if you're willing to do that.
Thank you for a fantastic segue, because that was going to be my next question, is why do you think it matters that onboarding should be so important?
Offboarding.
Sorry, offboarding. See, I made notes. I made my notes. Wrong podcast. I've made notes, even made offboarding in capitals, yet got it wrong. There you go. That's what happens when you record live. So why do you think offboarding matters?
Absolutely. And it's funny because we use the word onboarding so much, and offboarding is a little bit clunky and it's not really used. Like we talked about this last time. I am German. You guys are, well, you're not officially British, but I would count you towards like basically native British speakers, close. Ben, Northerner. So for you guys, it's being like getting sacked, being laid off. I think there's like a few other terms that you guys use. I worked in the US. In the US, it's like the classic getting fired element to it. So I think offboarding is not something that you'd ever use. Like I got offboarded from a company. It's like I got fired or I got laid off or, all those things, which kind of speaks to there is rarely ever a process there. It's just kind of an action, right? Your boss tells you that's it. And whether you have a notice period or not kind of depends. It is so important for the company, mainly because, a poorly offboarded employee can do a lot of harm, number one. Word of mouth travels fast. We have review sites for companies now, very easy for like unhappy employees to go on there and kind of rant about it. Very detrimental to the employer brand. And the second aspect is something that we've seen, especially now with like these mass layoffs happening during the pandemic, that you have to take care of the people that are left, right? The survivors. What do they feel like, when 25% of their colleagues were just sacked? What are they going to do? Do they feel like, oh, are we next? Like what? That feeling of insecurity and fear can be really, really horrible for your overall performance, especially during difficult times, right? So you have to take care of both elements, the people that leave, but also the people that stay behind.
Absolutely. It's that employer branding element to the external world, but also to the internal world. And I've been at the receiving end of both being onboarded, let's say offboarded as well. And I don't think I've ever gone through a proper offboarding process when I was leaving a job, apart from an exit interview, which left a lot to be desired. And actually, I don't think anything was actually done with it as a result. And
don't get me started on exit interviews just yet. We can leave that for a rant halfway in.
Okay, we'll leave that for a rant a bit later on. But actually, I did want to ask you something, Ben. In your experience, what do you think? So we create, basically by treating people, doing the right offboarding process, we create evangelists, don't we?
Absolutely.
Again, what do you think? Why does that matter? Why is it so important? We send a message internally. Why is it so externally important?
Okay, so let's focus on that word, evangelist, and that's something. Offboarding employees is something that is incredibly close to my heart. People use the word passion. I'm passionate about this. I'm passionate about that. I'm passionate about delivering food. I'm passionate about restocking shelves. I'm passionate about flipping burgers. No, you're not. You're passionate about not starving to death. So the word passionate is thrown around in certain jobs so often. I would say I am passionate about offboarding, and I choose those words carefully. And the reason I'm so interested in the topic is because, like Angelina said, and you've said yourself, it's so ignored, and people don't understand the damage it can do. So let's talk about why it's important to create evangelists. We'll go through the frame, the context of redundancy. You work for a company for 2.5 years as an SEO specialist for a digital agency. There's a downturn, a pandemic, and you are no longer needed. Your position is made redundant. It's not your fault, really. You're not doing anything wrong. But the way in which that company moves you from being an employee to being back on the open market is going to impact the company's internal reputation, the company's external reputation, and how you feel and how you're going to speak about the companies. And let's tackle those in 3 different areas. If you are just given an email that says, due to the pandemic, your services are no longer required, thanks, bye-bye, you're going to feel terrible. You're going to feel unvalued. You're going to feel angry, betrayed almost. You're not going to feel like that was, did I have the wool pulled over my eyes? These people who said that they cared about me and my development and all the foosball tables and all the free lunches, at the office when I went in there, were they for nothing? You're also going to tell the people who are left, guys, everything that they say is like, their actions don't match the words don't match their actions. We value the company, we value the employees. You're part of a family. People use that word family, but to just like that, you're gone. You're going to tell them when you then leave the company, and that's where the evangelizing starts. You're going to a new company. Oh, what happened? Where were you at? Oh, I was at agency XYZ. Really? What was it like? I thought it was great, but when I left, I got an email, no severance pay. They demanded everything back, and now no one speaks to me. I'm like a pariah. And word travels very quickly. If there's one thing being in the digital world has taught me, it's this big. And for those of you who can't see the video and you're listening on the podcast, I'm making a tiny circle with my hands. It's really small, and you're going to come across the same people in the same companies time and time and time again. And in the context of the current pandemic, when COVID is over, people are going to remember how they were treated long after the word coronavirus has been forgotten. They are going to remember who treated them well. And this goes not just for employees, but also for companies and customers, people chasing accounts payable and receivable when there's no money in the bank. People are going to remember this. And so there's an option when you are offboarding someone to turn them into an evangelist. Make them your walking, living, breathing, networking advert. You basically have somebody going out and promoting your company simply because of the way you parted with them. And I wrote for my previous company that I worked for, I wrote a very lengthy memo report suggesting ways in which we could create evangelists. Very cheap, very, very cheap ways that you could create company evangelists. And this is something that we're bringing across to our current company. This is something that it's something that as long as I'm involved either at an executive, directorial or management level, it's something I'll advocate for, because every company is people first until the money dries up. And then you find out who really is people first. And it's when companies' backs are against the wall and they're in a situation that's, I'm going to use that word, unprecedented, you find out just how much they truly value them. Sorry, Angelina, I feel like I've just waffled there for 5 minutes.
I have a few questions for you, because first of all, I'd be super curious, like what kind of strategies you suggested to your former employer, mainly because we've seen that, right? Like we've seen some of our clients from one day to the other, like our point of contact was gone, where I was trying to reach out to somebody and that just kind of, I got like an unknown email, return to sender kind of thing. So following up with people on LinkedIn, like you have different ways of getting in touch with people now and kind of like feeling, okay, there are like certain things happening in different industries and they happen very fast. And I think that was, not in defense of those companies, but I can see, or I saw in several companies, the crisis mode that they were in. And exactly what you said, like it turned out, okay, people first was really not what they were thinking about. They were like trying, to their defense, I think some companies were really just trying to keep the company afloat. And that meant like you have to cut payroll as quickly as possible because payroll for most companies is the biggest expense, right? So the quicker you get rid of people, the better. In Germany, we were very lucky. We have like government subsidies for payroll. So I think a lot of people up until now got spared from being laid off because simply the government is taking over the payroll and people are just staying on with their companies. That will change, I think, now in the next coming months. And I think, like we talked about this, when a recession is coming, like that's just a natural progression as people will be let go. And that's kind of normal. The job market moves in those ways. But I think the advantage that companies have now is that they can prepare for it because they couldn't do it before. In the US, very different situation, I think, than in the UK and here, where you have a 2-week notice period. Very simple. You can have people like cut off from one date to the other, basically collect their laptops or have them sent it in and they're done, right? It's like, good, bye-bye. And they did that on Zoom because people were at home and then people just got laid off in masses on Zoom. And I don't think that will happen in Europe to that extent in the next coming months. Like, I don't see that coming. I think now there is the opportunity to prepare, but companies should take it, right? Write that, playbook or whatever you want to call it to prepare you for that case. And it doesn't have to be a mass layoff, but even if it's just, one person here and there, like one person a month, I think having that process in place is going to save you money because you prepared it once. You don't have to worry about it every time it happens. You kind of just like, okay, playbook out for people that are not comfortable letting other people go, which is something, as an executive, as a director, like, it is hard. It's not a nice thing to do. Give them a script, that they can, like easy things like that, having those things in place, super effective. And then having the opportunity for evangelists, I think is absolutely brilliant and entirely feasible right now. I think there are no excuses anymore. In March, maybe there was an excuse for saying like, shit, the company was about to go under. What are we going to do? Managers are human. Bad things happen.
Yeah, no, I get that. And sorry, Angela, I didn't mean to cut. I thought I apologize.
No. I want you to take over
there. So go back to the first point. Yeah, I fully understand. Sometimes there needs to be redundancies to cut payroll. I 100% get that. I absolutely do. In the specific frame of redundancies, companies need to cut payroll. However, it's the way in which the redundancy results in an offboarding that needs to change. And so let me give you some of the examples and some of the things I thought. One of the companies I previously worked for had a customer, and this tale takes us back to the UK, had an office, a remote office in New York City. And it was a customer service office. And one day, one of the chief CXOs went into the office and just told everybody, as of tomorrow, you're all gone. Wham, bam, thank you, ta-ra, goodbye. Now, some of these people had been working for this company for 20 years, 20 plus years. 2 decades of their life that they had given, sold, devoted to this company. 2 decades. That's a long time. That is a long time to feel, or to be told that you're part of a company's culture, you're part of the family, you're so very valued, but then bang, you're pulled from underneath your feet, and as of tomorrow, you're out. And what spurred the report that I wrote, and I'll be happy to share a sanitized suggestion of this report as well with your listeners, was what we can do to ease that offboarding process. And it starts on this. If you have been out of the job market for 20 years, you probably had an in-person interview when you got the job. You probably went to somewhere, sat down, or had a phone interview with them. Went and spoke to somebody in HR, sat in front of them, had the chat, and went. Your CV probably hasn't been updated for 20 years because you didn't need to. You went to the same office, spoke to the same people, worked for the same managers for 2 decades. So my first suggestions were, hey, why don't we, if you've given this company 2 decades ago life, why don't we foot $300 for a professional CV writing service? $300, that's all it was. Or for those of you counting in pounds sterling, £240. £240, thank you for your service. Why don't we get them some professional remote interview coaching for Skype or Zoom? $400 for a few sessions, hour-long sessions with somebody to coach them. This is the kind of questions you're going to get asked. This is such a small cost to the company, but the impact it's going to have on that employee is going to be astronomical. After 2 decades, the job market has changed. If you need a laptop, if you have a company laptop that you can take home and work and you can bring in with you when you work, sanitize it, let them keep it. They're going to need a piece of a laptop or a PC to apply for jobs and to re-enter the new job market. If you look at a company's P&L on the very, very bottom line, how much is a 5-year-old MacBook really going to dent the coffers? Let them keep the equipment. Create an alumni network. Create an alumni network on LinkedIn or your other social media channel of choice. If the people are good enough to work for you for 20 years, keep them in mind for future jobs. I mean, hell, try not to offboard them in the first place, but that's a different story. So these 4 things, alumni network, CV coaching, interview coaching, and keep the equipment. If I was offboarded and someone said to me, here's all this stuff, thank you so much for everything you've done, it's not your fault, it's a situation, I would go to my next employee and say, yeah, I came from agency XYZ, look at all this stuff they did for me, what would they like to work with? Absolutely, let me tell you how I left the company. I didn't get a pen that said, thank you for your service. I have lots of pens everywhere, I need more pens. But I got this coaching, I got all these other products and services to help me get back into the job market. And it's little things like that, they're not expensive things like that I think would have a disproportionate impact both on the person, on the individual who's been offboarded, but also the reputation of the company. And as I said before, once all this is forgotten, once this is assigned to textbooks, people are going to remember how the last company treated them.
Absolutely. And I think one of my new favorite questions that I would recommend to anyone who is interviewing for a job in the next few months and going forward into the future should be, as a candidate, ask the company you are interviewing for, how did you handle coronavirus? How did you look after your employees, the ones that stayed with you throughout? How did you support them? And if you were unfortunate enough to have to go through redundancies, how did you handle that process? Because that will show you what the company is really made of. Once properly and truly made of, and you know what their DNA is about. And I think that's a fantastic indicator.
So just on that, and Angela, you mentioned it earlier about mass layoffs. If you Google Weight Watchers, if you Google Bird, and if you Google Uber, the first few news articles you find are about faceless, anonymous, gagged mass layoffs. Can you imagine a more disrespectful way than it's like if it was in an office, bringing all your on-site employees into a room, gagging them, and telling them all they've got till tomorrow to clear their desks. You would never do that. It's impersonal, it's disrespectful, and it's unethical. And I don't know why companies think it's appropriate to do those kind of things remotely. I get, it's impractical. It's impractical to call people at one-to-one. It's not impractical to employ them. It's not impractical to have a 30-minute conversation with people. Hell, the world was closed down for 3 months. What else were you going to do? It's never impractical to be respectful of people.
Absolutely. And Angelina, can you help me direct this a bit more onto remote working? Because Ben covered kind of the key principles, and no matter the size of the organization, how modest the budget might be, all you need to do is just be human and be respectful of the person that has put in blood, sweat, and tears and a lot of effort into your company, and then sadly you have to let them go, even if you don't want to. In a remote setting, how can we do that? What are the important elements to watch out for?
I think a really interesting aspect, and it just made me think of my last job, which wasn't officially remote, but I was sort of the satellite in New York for a German company. I'm not sure if I ever told you this. And when I decided to quit, I had to do that conversation with my boss remotely across 6 time zones, right? And it was a young startup, and I think for them, even paying like let's say £1,000 for like a proper offboarding would have been too much at that point. Like it was, very, you know, young, scrappy kind of company. But for me, I didn't have a fantastic experience in all transparency, right? Like it could have been better, but it could have been done better remotely and also completely for free, right? Just with like the way people react and, having a boss that shows appreciation and, shows appreciation for the solutions that you bring. Like I was giving a really long notice period. I was like providing potential people that could follow up in that job. I was really thinking ahead for the company, planning a handover, these kind of things. And I kind of got faced with somebody who was like, okay, so she wants to leave. I need to like minimize my financial loss here, like trying to like get me out as early as possible, not having to pay another month's salary kind of thing. So for me, that was like it left a very sour taste in my mouth. Um, and I think if I had been at the office, at their office in Germany, they wouldn't have done that with me. But because I was the person who was off somewhere else, I was kind of in this like out of sight, out of mind. Oh, we don't have to face her for like another couple. Have these uncomfortable situations at the coffee machine, those kind of things, right? Which I think in an office it really prevents you from treating people in a bad way. So when you're remote, you have to be extra careful. To make it humane, right? And that I think goes beyond just that 30-minute exit interview or whatever you want to call it. That goes with like, yeah, maybe sending them something physical, just like flowers, cupcakes, whatever you do at the beginning for the onboarding. That you can do that for an offboarding really easily. The second thing is having everybody come together. I think mass layoffs is something that's very unusual, right? That happens sometimes in a company, but usually it's like, okay, one person's leaving, or maybe it's two. Get everyone together for a coffee chat to have those moments, celebrate the achievements that the person has made for the company. Very easy. We had a freelancer leave acework recently. She's focusing on other projects, but I made it a point of like highlighting all the things she did over that past year for us. You know, partly also to remind myself to be like, okay, she was a really great person to have, even though like we amicably just decided like right now it's not working anymore. Um, but also for everyone else on the team to like just show, and people that were new on the team to show that's what she's done. Also to ensure from a very business perspective, not like a fluffy, fuzzy, we all like each other, but from a business perspective, as a manager, I want that person to answer my email when I have a question about some work that she did 3 months ago. And she does every time, because I can't think in advance everything that I need in that like 1 or 2 week handover. Like I'm not the superhuman who can think through all the scenarios. 3 months down the line, I run into some like odd thing that she set up in, like an email service or whatever. And I don't understand it. I send her an email and like I get a reply 4 hours later when she wakes up. That I think for me, that's so invaluable as a manager. And you want to have that relationship, because if you part with someone on that kind of sour note, but you're like, oh yeah, like I didn't pay them that next salary, made a, saved a few bucks here, it's gonna, come back to you and, cost you down the line. Yeah.
That's such a good point, especially remotely, especially across time zones. It's not like you can go to the skyscraper office next door, knock on and say, really sorry about all that. You're going to be waiting, like you said, across time zones for that kind of information. And because you have people, say for example, account management roles or any role really that's built on relationships, you're going to need that handover. And with all the things that are going on as part of the exit process, that again companies don't do very well, generally speaking, in my experience, there's so much information that's likely to get missed. And it's a great point, Angelina, to be honest. And yeah, I'm definitely gonna write that one down. It's about making sure you lose the resource for your company, but you don't lose the person. That you can go back and give them a quick call if you need a head. Hey, I want to thank this client for something. what sport does he or she like, or what's his favourite restaurant, or where does she go for coffee, that kind of stuff. The kind of intricacies of account management, if that was a role. That's a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of companies, you're absolutely right. Those intricacies, they should be documented in a CRM, for example, right? If you use like your HubSpots and Salesforce and all of that correctly, and you kind of tell your employees like everything needs to be documented for that seamless handover, but it is not all there, right? And people, it's that kind of, whether it's technological debt when you have engineers leave, I think that's a very similar comparison there, or you have an account manager leave. Knowledge always leaves with them. It's very normal, right? Yeah. So having that relationship, I think, can be beneficial. What you shouldn't do, and I've had that happen to a friend of mine, not to me, who sort of has been called up for like not to do work, but like extensively, where it was like she's not working for this company anymore. Like she shouldn't do all of that. So I think it's also a little bit in the responsibility of an employee when you decide to voluntarily leave. Make sure that you document your work well, right? So you don't have to deal with that. I think when you're with a company, it's kind of like in a relationship, like you don't think about the breakup too much, but we're all rational people. So I think we should, prepare for those things. And coming back to all the way at the beginning when we talked about, onboarding, so much emphasis on it, offboarding, not so much. I think part of that is also because in relationships, we have a similar thing, right? You have that like honeymoon phase where everything is perfect, everything's great, and then you sort of have the relationship. In the end, like breakups are rarely amicably, like very very few that I know end super well. Humans are emotional, even in a business setting, and that's I think why it is so hard for us. Whereas like we can rationally think like, yes, offboarding is if it's done poorly, it's costly, but humans are still, angry about it or and can't see it in a completely rational, neutral way. What do you think, Ben? Like, I remember quitting my last job was like a breakup. It was a company that I was very close to, like I grew with them, had a close relationship to people there. And when I decided to leave, I felt horrible. My boss felt let down. It felt like I was abandoning him. And I was like, dude, I'm not like, don't take it so personal. Like but it's very hard sometimes, So I think detaching yourself and being like, well, this is a business decision. I'm going to do what's best for me as a company, as an individual.
Ben, before you answer that, I'll jump in with one comment on that, because I think there's a difference between when we talk about redundancy and when somebody, as you, Angelina, mentioned, decides to leave. If we explore that a bit further, because in my opinion, when an employee decides to leave, you, Angelina, related it to an emotional part of being in a relationship, because that's basically what it is. And as a result, the employer feels abandoned, betrayed, and has that negative reaction. And hence, often, I think that gets in the way of looking beyond that and thinking, yeah, let's offboard them correctly. Let's do it properly. We've had great times together, and all of a sudden, our journey goes different directions, but that doesn't mean we can't be human about it, basically. Ben, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just trying to come up with a metaphor for redundancy in a personal relationship.
But it's the other way around. It's like, your partner telling you, I'm breaking up with you, but out of nowhere. Even though with Corona, I think in certain industries, people saw it coming a little bit, where it was like, this is not going to be good for, yeah.
Especially in hospitality.
Yeah.
All the hotels are closed. Oh, right, okay, guys, I can sort of see where this is going.
Yeah.
No, it's a really interesting point, and going back to the idea of creating evangelists. If you break up on good terms, I don't know if there's a link there between if people are going to go out there and evangelize for me as a potential partner. I don't know. Do they want, I don't know, dating coaching if they've been in a relationship for so long, to get yourself back into the field?
I think that's a completely different podcast idea.
No, it's a really interesting point. And talking about the emotion of it, you can take a lot from the terminology redundant as well. The word redundant is whilst and I can speak about the UK. Whilst in UK law, it's the role that is made redundant. The word redundant, you are being made redundant. You are no longer needed. All the effort and time you've put in, and all the times you felt part of the family and felt indispensable to the company, you are no longer needed. And I think, Angela, to follow from your point, there is a big difference between making the choice to go and leaving on your own terms and making sure that you are the one it's either you are dumped or you do the dumping. You leave or you are asked to leave because you are made redundant. And I think there's a lot of emotion in redundancies. I definitely think that, especially in the current situation where it's not just you going through the redundancy, you're seeing your colleagues both in the company and your neighbours and people in your family and your social groups all going through the same thing potentially. So it's a very unique situation how you handle it. You go through the stages of denial and it's not going to happen to me. I can fight for my job, and then it's just actually it's going to happen to me, and then you move on from that. But I think you can take a lot of the emotion. I think comes from the word of you. It's basically useless. You don't have a use in the company anymore. Oh right, okay.
That brings me to something that we talked, I think, off the record at some point where we said, because it is something that is so close to a person's core, you need to think beyond just giving them rational support, which is interview coaching, resume updates, et cetera, et cetera. But we talked about things like, sponsoring a mental health app, or like I don't know, I don't want to say a life coach, but like something that goes along those lines. If there's people where you feel like they could benefit from that more than maybe an immediate professional support system, I think companies should also be open to that, right? Maybe it is actually, of course you need a process, but people's situations are different. Like how much support does one person need? A person that has a family probably needs a little bit more support and is in their like mid-50s than someone who's in their mid-30s, unattached, right? So like looking at those things. And I think there are even some rules in Germany. I'm not too sure. I think Lufthansa was one of those examples where they're talking about mass layoffs right now, mass redundancies pretty much. Obviously, airline, not surprising. And Lufthansa is one of those companies where people have worked there for decades, right? My aunts worked for them for 30 years at this point. My family's from Frankfurt, where Lufthansa is based, and we know couples that both work at Lufthansa, right? And they're actually not allowed to lay off both partners if both work at the same company. I'm not sure if that's a Lufthansa policy or a German policy. I can research that and find out. But I think those are interesting aspects too, is right, do you have people at your company that are dating or married and then you're making 30% redundant and both of them happen to be in it? Like, is that something that you want to do to your family? So as a company, you do have that responsibility for your employees as well. And I think there is a little bit of a need for a case-by-case basis. So that whole putting everyone in a room and like laying them off on Zoom is not going to fly anyway.
No. That's a really interesting angle, that. And you'll like this. I'm going to bring it back to remote here. Because I told you we were going to get off topic. So that's a really, and honestly, Andrew, I've not thought about it like that. And the memo report I wrote was just about professional. It was very, I just need to get my thoughts down pretty quickly. But what a really good angle to take. And it's incredibly important in the remote aspect. So if your office is based in New York and you have remote employees in California on the other side of the country, you're not going to have peer groups that go out together. You're not going to have peer groups that socialise outside of work together. If everyone's in the same office and one person gets made redundant, they're going to have a physical support group. They're going to have people from the company that they're going to be able to interact with physically and see once restrictions die down. So you're going to be able to see if someone's not handling it well. And it will make its way around the office. It will make its way around the company. The water cooler, the coffee machine chat, people will know that. If you are so far removed from the company, you don't have to respond to emails. You don't have to pick up the phone. No one's going to knock on your door and say, hey, do you want to go out for a smoothie? Tell me how you're doing. So I genuinely think, and I'm personally going to absorb that if you offboard an employee, you have a duty of care to them, not only professionally, but I think emotionally. And not wanting to sound too touchy-feely, cuddly, everybody needs, everyone's a delicate snowflake. But if you've given years of your life to this company, and then just like that, your income, for some people, their identity, especially with remote workers, because, and I can speak for myself in the start of my remote career, I sat in this room for 12 hours a day, and it became such a core part of my identity. I became obsessed with working, absolutely obsessed with it. And I managed to come out of that, but it became almost who I was. I was a digital manager. I was a remote digital manager, and this is what I did, and this is how I worked with the team. So you take away people's financial security, their physical identity, and you upend them from however long they've been. So you're right, there's probably some emotional caretaking that a company needs to at least offer. I don't think you could, it's company policy to sign you up to Calm. They need to be, and it needs to be discreet as well. It needs to be discreet, and what a fantastic idea to offboard something that would be.
I think it would be brilliant.
I knew there's a bloody reason I liked acework.
There was, I can't remember who it was now. I'll dig up the name and I'll put it in the show notes. But there was a way of framing redundancies that an owner of an organization in the US, I believe, doesn't think of people in terms of head counts, but he uses the term heart counts. And he thinks of it as a member of your family. So how would you treat a member of your family? You wouldn't just cut them loose overnight with an email, would you? And I think that's a fantastic way of looking at it. As you were talking, I pulled up a memo that Brian Chesky, the founder and owner of Airbnb, sent out to him when he had to announce the layoffs. And I'll share the whole article because I think it's a fantastic case study. And I'd just like to get your thoughts on the final paragraph. I think that brings in everything that we talked about. And he says, and I quote, "To those leaving Airbnb, I'm truly sorry. Please know this is not your fault. The world will never stop seeking the qualities and talents that you brought to Airbnb that helped make Airbnb. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing them with us."
Do you want to go first, Angelina? Because I can feel a rant coming on here.
Well, it is a little bit of a touchy-feely CEO note, right? Like, he has to say that. I personally don't know anyone who's worked at Airbnb, and I wouldn't want to share gossip. But I can only assume what other things could have happened there. And in all honesty, companies now that have massively laid off people, some have done it really to keep the company afloat. Others have done it because they think we can really, we hire too many people, especially in fast scale ups. That really easily happens because you throw more humans at a problem, right? Like, that's a classic thing that you do in startups, and suddenly you're 100 people, suddenly you're 1,000 people. For a lot of companies, I think it was an opportunity to cut people that had been redundant before Corona. But what I think a lot of companies are doing, and I think I don't blame them, I think it's a very smart thing to do, is you can use Corona a little bit as that scapegoat for previous management mistakes already, right? And I get it, Airbnb has been hit horribly, but I don't really believe that they didn't have the payroll to float their entire company for another 3 months until things open up. Airbnb's bookings now better than ever because people don't want to go to hotels. So in that sense, I don't want to question his morals or question his strategy. They have been incredibly generous with people. I think they have paid them so much more than most companies can even afford, which kind of also shows if you had not done this, they could have, with all that money, maybe they could have had these people in their jobs for another 3 months to see how things are going. So it's a little bit of a give and take, I think, there. And yes, saying I'm so sorry, it's not your fault. It's also not my fault because it's Corona's fault, is also not really owning up to the problem here. But that's maybe it's a controversial opinion. I would like to see it in the comments, whatever's going.
I like a bit of controversy. There is a lot of context to this, and I'm always, because I see it on CNBC's website. So it's a quoted. It's not directly on Airbnb's. So I will always be a bit hesitant to say, the truthfulness of the source. But there's a whole the length of the note is quite long, and it does provide details about it. So as I say, we will refer to it in the show notes so everybody can have a read and make up their own mind. Ben, you are itching to talk. Go on.
First of all, it's a super smart comment. I think you're right. Corona has been the scapegoat for poor management decisions in some companies. I definitely agree with you there. Staring at the balance sheet at the end of 2019, thinking, what are we going to do about this? We're on track to make another loss. Hold on, guys. There's this great thing coming over from China. It's just the ticket, allegedly. The first time I was on LinkedIn and I saw an open letter from a CEO, I thought, this is fantastic. This is great. This guy's talking about how well the company is going to treat their employees and everything. And then there was another one. And then there was another one. And then there was another one. And it just became, I think, a PR cookie cutter stunt. Almost like nobody we've fired can say anything bad about us because we've written this letter, and that sort of absolves us of everything.
Why is it even an open letter on LinkedIn? I wonder, how did that get distributed internally? Did anyone have a conversation, or was that person being laid off in a mass layoff and then they read the open letter on LinkedIn? Worst case, I'm not saying that happened.
No, obviously we're
cynical. Clearly, we're the cynics.
Pure European speculation here, but it does sound like that. It's very much we've written this letter. We're so good. We're people first, even though we're getting rid of everybody. But we've written a letter. It's fantastic, and you should all read this letter if you're ever thinking about coming to work for us. Ignore those thousands of people without jobs. Read this letter. That's what we want you to read about how great. And the next time you saw another company laying off groups of people, even people who didn't, it just seemed like another bandwagon for them to jump on. Like someone's going through a COVID offboarding checklist. Have we written a heartfelt letter from the CEO? Check. Have we leaked it onto LinkedIn? Check. Right, maybe somebody could do a screencast of somebody fight. Yeah, check. We'll get one of those done right away, boss. It seemed to lose its authenticity the more that came out, is what I think I'm getting at. It seemed to be just we need to get this done, otherwise we're going to look bad in front of these other people that have done it.
Yeah, it's that herd mentality, isn't it? Other people are doing it, so should we. And I'm very skeptical when I hear announcements of layoffs for the same reason that you mentioned, that organizations are potentially jumping on the bandwagon yet again. Everybody's laying off staff as a tactic to protect themselves from what's coming in the future. But they don't look at their balance books and say, as you, Angelina, alluded to, could have Airbnb kept the money that they're offering, and I think they're offering 14 weeks base pay to everybody who's getting made redundant.
14 weeks, that whole thing, people are booking Airbnbs after 14 weeks.
Exactly.
That's
so it's just like there is, going away from Airbnb's example. My concern, and I always question if you're running a business and you have to lay off people because your business stopped overnight. To me, that potentially means I would look at the business practices. Because you always have to be prepared that whatever, pandemic or not, whatever happens, if your business stopped overnight, no money, no orders coming in, you still should be able to sustain yourself with the current overheads for best practices 6 months.
Yep. If you don't have the money in the bank, if you don't have the money in the bank to keep running for a period of time, it's not a business, it's just gambling. You are just bringing the money in and paying it right out. I agree.
The American economy works like that, I think, in a lot of ways. A lot of American companies are very, very tightly organized in that sense. It's just that's how it's not a best practice, as we would say. Germans don't like having debt, even. Germans don't like credit cards, all those things. So we're very conservative in that sense. But America's always been different. And I think that's why even restaurants, yeah, of course they need to sell. If they don't sell, they can't pay their employees and they're done. So, of course, everyone's being laid off. Their economy is in such a different shape now than it was 4 months ago. I'm not sure how we're going to pay for all those, like the German government, the EU, they have done these massive, massive support programs. We're going to pay for those for the next 50 years, I'm sure, but they're like really making an effort to like get money back into
I
the
think
economy.
I think
So
it's
we'll see how
our
that's going to go.
grandchildren will be paying for that.
Probably, yeah.
We're paying that. That's the. Don't get me wrong. It had to be done, and I think I'm impressed with the governments how they stepped up. The UK government, the German government, surprisingly the Polish government as well, which is close to my heart. So it's good to see that. But my fear, and actually that's one of the things that prompted us talking about offboarding, is once those grants run out in the next few months, that's when the proverbial is going to hit the fan. I'm not going to use the word here, but that's when we'll start seeing in the UK. I think there's is it a month or 2 months notice of redundancy. So I think there's they're meant to be the program is meant to finish in October. And so I think a month before that, the redundancies need to be announced if they're going to happen.
In the UK, if you have less than 2 years, I think it's if you have less than 2 years service, you're not entitled to any redundancy pay. It's only after 2 years you get, I think it's roughly £500 per year you've been employed, I think.
Which isn't a lot, really. Yeah.
No, it's not. It's not. And the unemployment in the UK as well, the government fund the unemployment. America gets a lot of things wrong, but some of the things they get right really do eclipse us. Some of the friends I've got in the US are earning more money from unemployment than they were in well paid tech jobs, very well paid tech jobs at the moment. And it's often me calling them up, laughing about the healthcare system. But unfortunately, they turn the tables on me now, and explaining how great their unemployment stuff is. So no, I think it's a really, really good point, and it's sort of the elephant in the room that nobody wants to acknowledge. When all this free printed money from the government ends and businesses are sort of left to their own devices again, who's going to be left standing? Who's going to be left with a job? And the only positive I can see from this is there's a date from which this is going to happen. So businesses at least have the opportunity to prepare, to try and seek alternative funding sources, or to get ready to offboard their employees in an ethical, compassionate, and considerate way, rather than the whole just one day everything's fine and then the next day COVID, which seemed to be literally overnight. Now there's at least as a lead up to businesses being able to see this.
Absolutely, and as we said before, right, there is no excuse to not prepare for it now. There's also no real excuse anymore for mass layoffs. I think it is more of, I think it's going to be a gradual thing, and I don't want to shame companies here that like have to let people go because of redundancy. I think that is something that in every recession happens, and it will happen again. But yeah, I don't think it should happen in the way that, okay, we're going to cut 25% of our workforce overnight because, suddenly we realize we can't pay them. Yeah, so I think we have made some really good points here. I see Lech has a few last closing comments for us probably as well.
I think it's a very nice point that you to finish on. A bit of a bombshell, but unfortunately, that's the reality that we're facing. That in the coming months, we will have redundancies coming, and we've got time to prepare, as you both said. And I think the companies should start taking responsibility and should start looking into it. Angelina and I have been having conversations off air about this topic, and we hopefully, with the help of Ben, we will have some materials coming out in the coming weeks to support the information, to support organizations on that. So watch this space. Final questions for both of you. Where can people find you? Angelina, you've already shared this with us last time. If you'd like to reiterate, what's the best to get in touch way of getting in touch with you?
Same as last time. It is definitely LinkedIn. Connecting with me there, writing that little message like where you found me and why we should connect. I'm happy to accept then.
Ben, is it LinkedIn as well, or is it your new venture?
No, LinkedIn. LinkedIn. I seem to spend more of my life on LinkedIn now than I have done in the last 5 years. So yeah, we're always happy to connect with anybody in tech, in hospitality, or anybody that wants to talk about remote working, remote management. I have strong opinions on the entire spectrum of remote work. So always up for an online argument.
And thank you very much for sharing those rants with us, Ben. And to both of you, once again, I'm so grateful for you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join me here today. To everybody listening, if you found it of value, if you found it interesting, and you know anyone else who might find it useful as well, please share this podcast with your networks. And on whatever platform you're listening to, be it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else, if you could give us a review to help us spread the word, it would be much appreciated. Until next time. One more thing before you take off. Nextep Group offers premium level support across a diverse range of remote work issues, 24 hours a day and in multiple languages, with experts in HR, legal, operations, tech, leadership, and more. It's open to leaders looking for guidance, consultants, and remote workers wanting to share their experience. You can join by visiting www.nextep.group. This podcast is produced and hosted by Lech Guzowski from Human PM. Special thanks to the founders of the Nextep Group, Christina Barger, Jelaine Chan, Stefan Dawn, and Matteo Grassi.